very important guest tonight, Bob Chesnut. I've known him for, God, I don't want to even say how many years, but I think we first kind of started to get to know each other around a group called the Subdudes. Rob has been, he's heavily into music, but he was also the general counsel for eBay, I think, when I first got to know you, Rob, and then more recently Airbnb, and you are chief ethics officer after general counsel. So I welcome, Rob.
Doug, thanks for having me. It's great to be here in Santa Cruz, my hometown.
Yeah, well, welcome back. So we just heard or saw a word cloud of people ideas of what integrity is. So help us understand the difference between intentional integrity and the word cloud of integrity.
Yeah, well, I'll start with integrity. I mean, I think integrity is a tough word to get your arms around. I mean, you saw all the different words popping up. Actually, some of them I might even disagree with, like loyalty. I think can actually lead you in the wrong direction sometimes. Um, I think I'll go to the traditional definition of integrity, and that is doing the right thing even when no one's watching. The what's really interesting, Doug, is that in today's world, somebody's always watching. When I grew up, there were 3 news stations. If I wanted to learn about something, I had to go into my parents' bedroom to pull out Encyclopedia Britannica. Today, we are all our own news station. We are all doing broadcast every day when we go on to social media, to Facebook or Instagram or LinkedIn, or when we tweet. We all carry around a camera crew with us. It's called a cell phone. And so what we see, I think, in today's world is that there aren't secrets much anymore, and so, it seems like every time I go online, there's another story about another executive who has committed another violation of integrity. They've lost their job due to sexual harassment or, Boeing, WeWork, Facebook, and the like. Part of this, I think, is just that the world has fundamentally changed. Things don't stay secret anymore, and therefore the standards are going up. The pressure is on. Now, integrity can mean a lot of different things to different people, and I think that's part of the challenge. I can talk a little bit later on about what it can mean in the context of business. But for me, a business has to have a North Star. It has to have a purpose. It has to have a reason to exist, a reason why it's good for the world. And that's got to be like front and center. Profit is not purpose. So integrity in a business sense, I think, is defining your North Star, defining your purpose, understanding who your stakeholders are, and then making decisions that are consistent with that purpose, even when it's tough. And understanding that as you go through the journey, people are watching all the time, and they're going to call you out on it. And so intentional integrity is this process of defining your North Star, understanding, who your stakeholders are, understanding that people are always watching, and understanding that you're going to screw up, and look, integrity is not perfection. If so, nobody would have integrity. I think it's about a journey where you're committing to that North Star and you're doing your best through words and actions to follow it, and then have the self-awareness to realize when you screwed up, say it, and get back on track again.
That's really interesting. And it seems like there's a big chasm between what politics would consider as integrity versus what a business would. Yeah. I'm going to ask Matthew to come on and start taking questions, and Josie's going to be looking at questions in the Q&A and bringing those, fielding those for Rob. So you're going to see me disappear here, but I'll be in the background playing with the controls.
Okay, thank you, Doug. So Josie, if she'll be actually taking care of the Q&A like Doug mentioned. So if you have a question for Rob, please put it in the Q&A and we'll definitely be able to ask him. I do want to ask a question, but I'm going to hold off. I want to find out about the subdudes. But I think that's probably a whole other event. So we'll leave that for another time.
All right.
But can you tell us about the science of integrity?
Yeah.
As mentioned, you were the chief ethics officer for Airbnb. Did you design Airbnb's integrity programs with science in mind?
No, I actually designed Airbnb's integrity program, and then later, I think learned that accidentally we had stumbled into some things that actually had some science background to it. So, I spent some time when I was, working on this book. I flew out to Duke University and met with a guy by the name of Dan Ariely. Some of you on this talk may know a little bit about Dan. Dan's got a bunch of TED Talks and books. He's got a great movie. Any of you who are really interested in behavioral psychology and lying, he's got a movie called Dishonesty. Fascinating. And he studies why people do dishonest things, particularly in business or the workplace. Now, I think when I was a prosecutor early in my career, and I think I believed that there were good people and bad people, right? That you got integrity or you don't have integrity. Dan basically taught me that I had it all wrong. And to do that, he talked to me about an experiment, sort of his base experiment that he's done for years. And the experiment goes like this. Fill up a room with people. You give them a sheet with a bunch of math problems on it. And he tells everybody, all right, I want you to start on the math problems. I'm not going to give you time to finish the whole page. When I say stop, stop. So Dan says, stop. People put their pencil down. He then says, come to the front of the room one by one. Take your sheet of paper with the math problems on it, put it in the shredder. And then as you're leaving the room, tell the proctor how many math problems you did. We're going to give you $1 for every problem that you tell the proctor you did. So people come up, they shred, they head out. What Dan doesn't tell them is that he played with the shredder. The shredder only shreds the outer edge of the piece of paper. So Dan knows exactly how many math problems you've done. The question is, what percentage of people lie in a simple experiment like that for $1 a problem? What do you think? What do you think, Matthew, Josie? What percentage of people do you think lie in an experiment like that?
Oh my goodness.
Throw it in chat if people have got guesses on this.
I'm going for 30%.
For $1 a problem. What percentage?
I think 30%. What do you think, Josie?
Josie?
I'll go a little bit higher. I'll say like 60.
Doug, where are you?
I'm here.
What do you think?
Yeah, I heard a guy Kawasaki podcast about this not too long ago, so I'd sort of be cheating if I respond.
You know the answer. Oh, that's good. That
Yeah.
that shows great integrity. Thank you. In the chat, what do we got? Over 75%, 50%. The cynical among you are correct. The correct answer is 70% of people lie, and it's not just in one experiment. He's done this experiment with tens of thousands of people all over the world. Who lies more, men or women?
Boy, I don't know, but I would have to say.
Everybody always says men, and I'm looking at the chat, men. Actually, no difference in gender. Men, women, the same. Now, what's extraordinary is I'll bet everybody on this phone call thinks they've got integrity. We all think we've got integrity, yet consistently 70% of people lie in a simple experiment like this. Why? So what Dan has learned in psychology is that we all have integrity issues that we're confronted with every day in life. And when we're confronted with these issues, as human beings, we are all naturally inclined to go to the answer that is good for us, that benefits us. That's a natural human tendency. And what happens is what prevents us from going all out and just lying every time, all the time? Well, what prevents that is a desire to feel good about ourselves. we need to feel good about ourselves. We can't feel that we're lying, terrible people. So what a lot of folks do is they end up what Dan calls fudging. So in the math example I gave you, most of that 70% only lie by 1 or 2 or 3 problems. And they lie only to that extent that they can rationalize it to themselves. So what it comes down to is, can you lie a little bit and fudge a little bit and still feel good about yourself? And if you can rationalize it well, then you're going to fudge. And the interesting thing with fudging is that a lot of dishonesty starts small. And when you start to fudge and you do it a few times, your brain actually becomes conditioned to lying and fudging, and you do more and more and more and more. And pretty soon you're way out there doing something you never would have dreamed of. That's why you see things like Enron, or the famous case of the NBA referee, Tim Donaghy. The people who are particularly intelligent or particularly creative are more prone to this. Why? Well, creative people are great at coming up with rationalizations, right? They're great at coming up with creative excuses for why what they're doing is okay. So it isn't a simple world where people have got integrity or they don't. The real truth is that all of us struggle every day internally with what's the right thing to do. And if we can talk ourselves into it and rationalize it, and it's in our favor, that's the direction we're going to go in. And then the interesting question is, well, knowing that, how do you influence people's behavior? In other words, if you know that that's people's natural reaction, how can you prevent people from fudging or going down that road? And surprisingly for me, as a former federal prosecutor, it's not the threat of punishment. Right? What actually influences human behavior is, since everyone wants to feel good about themselves, what he learned is that integrity is actually contagious. That is, if you believe that people around you have integrity and are acting good and doing right, you are far more likely to act with integrity yourself, because you don't want to feel that you're a worse person than everybody around you. So silence is the enemy of integrity. When no one talks about integrity and everyone is simply going about their ordinary business, then you have freedom to fudge and lie. Now, when people talk about integrity and highlight the importance of integrity and reward integrity, then people are far more likely to act with integrity. It's truly contagious. To demonstrate this, he does that same math experiment, but he makes one change to it. At the beginning, before people start the math problems, Dan says, I want you to write down as many of the 10 commandments as you can remember on the piece of paper at the top. He gives everybody time to write the 10 commandments. Then he says, okay, now start on the math problems. So he learns 2 things when he does the 10 commandment variation. The first is that nobody can remember all the 10 commandments. In fact, most people can't even remember half. Some can't remember any at all. But something really strange happens to his results. Cheating virtually disappears. It goes from 70% to under 10%. Just by reminding people of their better selves, reminding them of an ethical framework or a moral order, influences behavior tremendously. So if you're running a business and understand this, the most important thing you can do is the one thing leaders don't like to do. You actually need to talk about integrity. It's an uncomfortable subject. A lot of us feel like, well, who am I to talk about integrity? That I don't want to feel holier than thou. It's none of my business. This is work. The truth is, talking about integrity is a fundamental quality of being a good leader. And if you create the environment where everyone in the company believes that doing the right thing is valued and important, and that you as a leader are going to do the right thing, they will want to do the right thing and they will act with integrity as well.
This is perfect because a lot of our people that are tuned in today are business owners. So with that in mind, at what point is a company's growth, at a company's growth, should they start thinking about incorporating integrity into their DNA?
Well, I mean, today you better start thinking about it from the moment you're in the garage, thinking about starting your business. And here's why. Cultures are hard to change, particularly when it comes to integrity. If you go back to the original business plan of Hewlett and Packard in a garage, they were talking about it in their one-page mission statement that they drafted right from the very beginning. When you're starting a company, the first 5 people you hire are critical. And if you emphasize integrity and start talking about integrity and purpose and North Star in a business very early on, you're going to attract 5 people who are like-minded, who are inspired by that purpose, and who genuinely want to do the right thing. And then they're going to hire each 5 people who do that as well. But if you've already got 20, 50 people, 100 people or more, and you've never talked about it before, then it's a hard culture to change. I'm not changing Facebook today, right? Or WeWork or Google. That's difficult. But if you do it from the very beginning and build it into your culture, it's so much easier. And I'll tell you another reason. And this comes as a surprise to a lot of people. I know some people are thinking, well, Rob, this integrity stuff's all really nice, but business is business, right? This is business. And I got to make money. The data demonstrates companies that operate with integrity or are perceived to be operating with integrity by neutral objective standards actually outperform the market, and they outperform their competitors. Why? Well, number one, you got to understand today's employee. Today's employee wants more than a paycheck. They want to make money, but they also want to feel as though what they're doing has value in the world. They want to feel good about it. They want to be part of something that is making the world a better place. That drives them as well. So if they find a place where their values are rewarded, they are consistent with the company's values, they will, first of all, they're more likely to sign on and want to work there. They'll work longer and they'll work harder, and they'll bring in like-minded friends. Same with customers. We are in an age of conscious consumerism. So what do I mean by that? Data shows that 10 years ago, less than 20% of consumers identified themselves as being value conscious consumers. That is, did they care about the values of the company they were going to do business with? Today, that number is over 70%. So consumers want to do business with companies that have values aligned with their own values. If they perceive that a business doesn't have the values that they have, they're going to leave. I've seen it in Santa Cruz. I've seen a restaurant in Santa Cruz where an owner came out. It came out that an owner was had supported causes that were not consistent with the values of people in Santa Cruz. And you know what happened? People started boycotting it. They didn't go anymore. They were out of business fast. So people care about the fact that you've got values. Now, integrity is a double-edged sword in business. Get it right, and it can drive your business. It can make you more successful. Get it wrong, and it can shut you down. And so, but you've got to be intentional about it. You can't just sort of assume, oh, I'm a good person. I'm sure my employees, they seem like really good people. And I'm just here to make money. It's all going to be fine. The premise behind the book Intentional Integrity and Dan Ariely's work and the works of Airbnb, Patagonia, Ben and Jerry's, so many companies now, is that you need to be intentional about it. You can't assume. You've got to talk about it. You've got to plan for it. You've got to drive it in your culture. But when you do, the rewards are powerful. It used to be that integrity or ethics and business were mutually exclusive terms. Now we are building toward a world where you can't be successful without it.
So, yeah, that brings up a good point. You talked about how, if you don't put integrity into your business, it actually affects your customers, like you mentioned that business in Santa Cruz. But it seems like there's so many businesses now that are companies that are failing at integrity. And we could ourselves, our business owners, we can integrate it into our businesses. But what's going to happen? Is there going to be a tipping point when all these businesses that we see in the news are going to stop putting that stop, or I guess doing good, or actually putting integrity into their business?
Well, no, I think you're going to see more and more of it. And the reason is because, I mean, what you've probably noticed in the news is that there are a lot of examples of a lack of integrity, right? Volkswagen, Boeing, Facebook, Google, WeWork, Uber. And I think it stems from the fact that a lot of business leaders today went to business school. And when I say business school, I mean both the formal business school and the informal, learning business under an old set of rules. The old set of rules was based on a principle by Milton Friedman called shareholder value. And it went something like this. Milton Friedman's theories were businesses should always do what's best for their investor/shareholder. If you're doing what's right for your investor shareholder, then it is good by definition. And that's the only thing you should ever do. You should only focus on increasing the value to your shareholders. Now, Milton Friedman's work was based on work by a professor. The problem with this thinking, this exclusive focus on basically money, is that it encourages short-term thinking. So in other words, do whatever is good to bring the share price up today. Because if you don't bring it up in the short term, you might not be around in the long term. All that matters is get the share price up this quarter, hit this quarterly number. And in the race, the short-term race to get your stock up, there are often collateral consequences, right? So let's don't worry about the carbon that we're dumping into the air and fouling the environment, because fixing it would cost us money. That would drive down our profit. That would hurt the share number. So I'm actually doing good. I'm doing the right thing by shareholders by not fixing that. Or I know that the people I'm doing business with on the other side of the world have a factory where the conditions are terrible, but that's really not my business. That's their business. And doing business in a more expensive place with better conditions would cost me money and hurt shareholder value. That was the old way of thinking. So here's what's happened just in the last several years. Shareholder value has been rejected as the basis for business. Organizations like BlackRock, the Business Roundtable, which is the organization of all the major CEOs in the country, they have now all rejected shareholder value. Even the academic who originally did the thought work from Milton Friedman has now come out and said that it was the worst mistake of his lifetime and he deeply regrets it and that it's wrong. Because it doesn't, why should shareholders be the only thing that you think about when you run a business? Why are investors the only thing? Now, are they important? Sure, they're important. But there are other stakeholders that are important too. And so what's happened is that we've evolved away from shareholder thinking and gone to what's called stakeholder principles. What's stakeholder principles? It's a recognition that every business has multiple stakeholders, and it ought to operate that business to the benefit of all the stakeholders. Now, shareholders/investors, they are stakeholders. They're an important stakeholder, but they're not the only ones. So at Airbnb, we had 5. We had our investors. We had hosts on Airbnb. We had guests on Airbnb. We had Airbnb employees. And lastly, our final stakeholder was the world. That is, whenever we made a significant decision, we would think about what's the impact of this decision on all 5 of our stakeholders. We actually had metrics to measure the health of all 5 stakeholders. And we felt as though we owed an obligation to all 5 stakeholders. That sort of thinking is increasingly viewed as the way that business needs to be done in the 21st century. And if you don't operate that way, if you operate under the old way of thinking, you're going to get called out for a lack of integrity. And I think some of the problems we've seen right now have been caused by a combination of 2 factors. One, you have people who were brought up in the old way of thinking who haven't let go of it yet. They're still operating in the old way. And number 2, in the new world, there are no secrets. So if you're operating with that integrity, you're going to get called out at so fast. Susan Fowler's blog post, and Susan Fowler was an employee, a mid-level employee at Uber. She blew up that entire company. There's far more power now with individual employees, and they are quick to speak up. And by the way, they're not always fair. Some of you who do business in Santa Cruz may be thinking, yeah, I got the integrity message, Rob. I got it loud and clear. And in fact, my employees are so focused on integrity that they're not even realistic. And you may well be right in some regards. The world is not always fair. And you hear about cancel culture. Well, cancel culture in some cases is an excuse for bad behavior. And it's an attempt to easily kind of deflect bad behavior. But sometimes it can reflect the fact that people in the world jump to conclusions really quickly. Things move fast now. And it isn't always fair. So you got to be ready.
Great. Let's switch gears a little bit and talk about our current situation where we're getting through coronavirus. It's getting better. There's a chance in Santa Cruz we're going to be getting into the yellow tier next week, but we're still, it's still an issue. In response to the coronavirus pandemic, you updated your book with a chapter on leading with integrity during a crisis. What lessons have we learned during this time?
Well, a crisis reveals character. And so when there is a crisis, that's when trust is built, right? And everyone's really watching during a crisis. I'll give you an example. Look at Airbnb, business was going along great until the coronavirus hit. And it went from, up and to the right to a straight line down to nothing overnight. You got 6,000 employees, you got, a lot of expenses, and you've got no revenue. Now, Brian, the founder of Airbnb, he did some things that I think were really smart and showed a lot of integrity, even though it was a tremendous crisis and drastic steps needed to be taken. I'll tell you one of the first things he did, which I think leaders need to do in a crisis. Leaders have to suffer first. I could not believe when I read things where companies are laying off thousands of people and the CEOs are taking home big bonuses, still collecting big paychecks. Employees will not respect that. So there's a saying in the military, leaders eat last. If you're a leader in a company, you've got to lead by taking the pain first. I remember I spent some time, and there's stories in the book with based on my conversation with Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA. When coronavirus hit, one of the first things Adam Silver did, major pay cut. I think it was a 50% pay cut or a 75% pay cut for he and his top leadership, because he knew there was going to be pain. But you can't lead and expect others to endure pain if you're not willing to accept it first. And that's what Brian and the leadership at Airbnb did. Another thing we did was, straight talk. There's not a lot of, there wasn't a lot of happy, it's going to be okay. Don't worry. We're all in this together. Because look, Brian knew that we weren't going to all be in this together. There were going to have to be layoffs. And rather than tell people necessarily what, the happy talk, he was direct. And early on, he said, look, I don't know what we're going to be doing yet. This has happened quickly. We're going to have to look at the situation carefully. We're talking about it. And as soon as we can give you more information, we will. But everything's on the table. And the executives at the company have taken a 50% pay cut. Boom. Right? And then when the layoffs occurred, they were done, I think, with empathy and where possible, done in a way that recognized that employees are important. So a year of health insurance for everybody, because in a situation like that, you need your health insurance. A small thing, usually when an employee at a tech company is let go, one of the first things they do is say, well, give us your laptop. Well, we said, wait a minute, we're letting go of 2,000 people. What are we going to do with 2,000 used laptops? Not going to be hiring, we don't think, in the near future. So what good is it going to do us? And these employees may need that laptop because their kids are going to be at home doing school remotely. They may have a spouse working remotely. They may need that computer to look for a job. So we let everybody keep their laptops. We also, I think, we're generous with severance because we had the cash still to be able to do it. But the message it sent to those people, and by the way, to the employees that remained, was you are important. We care about you. And we're going to do the best that we can to try to take care of you, even though this is a crisis that threatens the company.
What a good story about laptops. I think I'll always remember that one. That is really nice. Let me ask the next question. Is Google's do no evil a good motivator for a company's integrity?
I think it is way too general. So silence is the enemy of integrity. So is a lack of specificity. And you can say do no evil, but let's look at what they did with, and I'll tell you a published story about Google, and I'll contrast it to how Airbnb looked at the situation. So at Google, you had their chief legal officer engage in an extramarital affair with a paralegal on his own team while he worked at Google. She became pregnant. And then the company went to them and said, well, looks like you all have a relationship. We're going to have to separate you. You can't be, you can't work together. Somebody's going to have to leave. And it was pretty obvious who would have to leave, right? It was the paralegal. They moved her to another role in the company. The relationship ended, and she wasn't suited to the other role, and she was out of a job a year later. Yet that general counsel, that chief legal officer, continued to make huge sums of money. And the story didn't become public for quite a while, but when it became public, wow. How can you as a company say do no evil if you look at a situation like that and you handled it that way? So I'll give you an example of specificity dealing with the same problem. When allegations of sexual harassment came out at at Uber, and when the Google story came out, I walked into an executive team meeting at Airbnb and said, Me Too is real. The world is changing. Bad behavior is not getting swept under the rug. We see these issues happening all around us. We need to be intentional about how we're going to address this. And so one of the things I did in that meeting is I said, I propose that all of us on the executive team, and there were 12 of us, including the founders, I propose that we all agree that none of us will have any romantic relationship of any kind with any employee or any vendor. Why should we go there? The danger of that, the harm, the lack of the out of balance between the power imbalance between members of the executive team and other employees were too great. The fallout for careers and brands was too great. Why don't we just look around the table and why don't we just agree we're not doing it as a group? And we went around the room. And I remember one person said to me, oh, Rob, we're all married or in relationships anyway. And I looked at him and said, well, judging what I'm reading in the paper, an executive being married doesn't stop this kind of behavior. And there was, a little nervous laughter around the room. And then I said again, what do you want to do? And we went around the room and each person said, I'm in. And we all knew in that moment that if any of us then engaged in some sort of sexual relationship, romantic relationship with an employee or a vendor, we were going to have to leave the company. We had broken our word to each other. And then we put it in the code of ethics and published it. The members of the executive team would not do that. And I don't think we broke any hearts in the company by taking this position, but we were intentional. These are the rules. This is the way we're going to operate. We're not going there. And I think by being intentional about it, we made it far less likely to actually happen. By the way, we also did one other thing for employees. We made a rule that if you're a manager, you may not ask out or engage in any romantic relationship of any kind with anybody on your team, even a consensual one. You can't do it because of the power imbalance. And then for everybody else in the company, relationships will happen as long as you're not an executive team member or as long as there's not a control relationship. You may ask someone out, another employee, but you have the one no rule. If you propose something and you get a no, then you've got to drop it. You can't ask someone out again, even if you get a nice excuse. So if you propose a date and someone says, well, I'd love to, but my parents are coming in from out of town or my dog's sick, that's it. You got to drop it. You can't ask them out again because we want, look, it's not a bar. At a bar, you can be persistent. At a bar, the other person can walk away. At work, the other person can't walk away. Ask once. If you get a no, you got to drop it, because we have to respect the fact that we want people to be comfortable at work. We want them to be able to do their best. We don't want them to have to worry about dodging an employee who might be bugging them to go out on a date again.
So both of those examples, you were being proactive. But I guess on the flip side, what would your advice be to a company or say an individual dealing with the aftermath of an integrity lapse, especially in this time where, Twitter, LinkedIn, anything we say, anybody we do could last forever?
Yeah, we had one of those at Airbnb. My first month at the company, I'm the new general counsel, and we start seeing reports online about discrimination on the platform. Guests of color being turned down, having a hard time getting a room on Airbnb. There was a hashtag Airbnb while black, and the momentum grew. More stories about it. We had professors setting up fake accounts to test it, and the initial reaction inside the company was disbelief. Like, this really can't happen, right? But then the cries about this grew louder and louder. We started doing our own internal looking, and we found, you know what? They're right. It is harder statistically. And, in response to the lawsuits, I went off and did my research. I'm the general counsel, right? So I go off and do my research. What is Airbnb's legal responsibility in something like this? Look, we had the great terms of service that said no, discrimination is not allowed. We won't tolerate it on Airbnb. Yeah, it was a nice paragraph in the terms of service somewhere. Some great law about the fact that as a platform, we didn't engage in any bad behavior. If we ever became aware of it, which is hard to prove, but when we could see obvious examples of it, we would throw someone off the site, but there was still clearly a problem. Was Airbnb liable? In fact, the discrimination laws even apply to Airbnb. We're talking about people inviting someone into their house, sharing a room. That is even covered by a number of discrimination laws, because these aren't professional landlords. So I went off and did all my legal research. I go in to sit down with Brian. This is probably my big first meeting with Brian since I've been the general counsel. And I start going through the law with him a little bit. Brian holds up his hand, says, I don't care. So what do you mean you don't care? And Brian says, Rob, Airbnb's mission, the North Star for Airbnb, is to connect people from different parts of the world through immersive travel, to encourage people to get out from behind their computers and to engage in authentic human experiences together. That's why Airbnb exists. Brian said, if this sort of behavior is really occurring on Airbnb, we are failing as a company. It's that simple. We're failing. And he said, I don't really care what the law says. We're fixing it. And I don't care what it costs. And you go solve the legal problem, but we're going to address it head on. And we did. Look, we went out, and I went out as the lawyer and publicly acknowledged the problem. Went out and partnered with civil rights groups and said, you know what? Instead of suing us, why don't you help us solve it together? And we did. Now, in doing so, by the way, we took a number of steps that cost us money, right? Like one thing we did, I'll never forget, Brian wanted to be very intentional and clear with everyone about the expectations. So instead of a paragraph buried in a terms of service with a checkbox, what we did is we created a screen when you logged in or joined Airbnb. And the screen basically, all it had on it was, as a member of the Airbnb community, I pledge, I will accept everyone, regardless of the color of their skin, their religion, their nationality. And then below it had a button, I agree or I disagree. And we said to Brian, well, what happens if somebody's, this isn't even the law in a lot of places, right? This is global. We're rolling this out globally. And we looked at Brian and said, what happens if they say, I don't agree? Brian says, they're gone. That's it. You're off the platform. And we said to Brian, well, that means, that we'll lose users. He said, I don't care. And we did. We lost 1.1% of our users by rolling out that one simple feature. Brian said, that's fine. Because we made decisions based on our North Star. And I think, and consistent with what I was saying earlier, you know what, we were stronger as a business as a result. We came out of it, I think, with earning the respect of a lot of people across the world, standing up for something that I think we believe is right. I think ultimately we will be more successful as a business by doing that, even though in the short run, we might have lost a number of users. And I think that's a great example of, you know what, have some self-awareness and realize when you get off track, go back to your North Star, make decisions based upon your North Star, do what you believe is right according to that North Star. And ultimately, you know, if your North Star is right, you'll come out of it all right.
What is talking about North Star, is there a baseline for what a North Star should be, or does everybody have their own individual North Star?
Well, I think every company is going to have their own North Star. Now, that North Star should be consistent, I think, with generally accepted notions of what's good and right. But there could be disagreement about what's good and right. You know, I think Airbnb's great mission, mission statement around connecting human beings through authentic personal experiences, that's generally perceived to be a good thing. You know, I think it can evolve over time too for a company, right? But I think it's less important. You're not going to come up with a mission statement that 100% of the people in the world agree with. So every company's definition of integrity is going to be a little bit different. But if it's out of touch, out of step with the world and the views of the world, it will be rejected. And you will, I think, fundamentally have to struggle as a business. And if it's not sincere, and you know, you've got a nice flowery statement, but really all your decisions are about the money, the bottom line, the shareholders, then you're a phony. And the world will ultimately figure that out, because we're in a new transparent world where the employees will see it, your customers will see it. There aren't that many secrets anymore. It'll get out, and ultimately it will hurt you.
For sure. Well, we have about 10 more minutes. And first of all, Rob, I mean, thank you so much for this. I'm so glad we're recording this. I know Doug texted me, we agree. We're just so enjoying this conversation. If anybody has a question for Rob, please put it in the Q&A. Again, we got 10 more minutes. Actually, I think there's a question there. Josie, do we have a question in the Q&A?
Yeah, I just saw this one pop up, so I hope I say these names right, because I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the story, but
I'm not familiar with the story either. So I see the names on there, but I'm not familiar with that particular story. I might, if I saw the details, it might trigger my memory, but I probably can't comment on it because I don't remember what it is. I will tell you that Google, you know, the question relates to how Google handled a particular situation. I think Google has struggled from an integrity perspective. And I think, and look, I know some of the folks there. The challenge for Google is, I don't think they have the language about do no evil, but I don't think they always lived it, to be honest. And the more stories came out about bad behavior, the more I think it disillusioned the employee base.
so
And
we
look,
just had a little more.
walkouts.
Oh. Excuse me, Rob. We had a little more background pop up that it was pertaining to ethics in AI, so autonomous intelligence. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, so the question says that Google wanted changes in the research that an AI group did in finding bias in their algorithms. I mean, I remember reading about it. I don't remember the details, but it's a perfect example of, you know, look, everything you do as a business, assume it's going to be in the newspaper, everything. And you've got to look at a situation like this, and Google failed to understand that, hey, wait a minute, our own employees found bias in the algorithm. if we're asking them to change that research, change the results, I mean, first of all, fundamentally, what do we stand for? Right? I mean, what are we doing? What do we really stand for? Are we really committed to building a company where the algorithms are not biased themselves and actually contributing to a bias problem in the world? And no one apparently thought that, wow, this might actually come out, because it will. Look, in the old days, you stayed at a company, you hope to work there for 30 years and get a gold watch. So if something went wrong, something unethical happened, most of the time you kept your mouth shut. You were afraid of losing the gold watch in the retirement. Now there's no more retirement. There's no more gold watch. And people are staying 2 years instead of 30 years. And they are emboldened to speak up. They're going to talk about this sort of thing. And they're often going to put it in the worst possible light. You got to understand that as a company. And and by understanding that, whether you do the right thing because it's the right thing, or maybe you do the right thing because if you do the wrong thing, you'll get, hammered online for it. Either way, you got to do the right thing.
Okay, got it. Well, actually, got a bunch of questions, but I'm going to narrow them down to 3 here. How does the global power of a tech platform impact integrity?
The global power of a text.
Sorry. How does the global power of a tech platform, so like a Facebook or a Google, impact integrity?
Oh, I think it has fundamentally changed integrity in business just in the last 5 years. Because again, what I was talking about early on, now everyone is their own news station. Everyone can publish anything they see to the entire world. And there are no secrets anymore. So in this kind of a world, bad stuff doesn't get hidden. You have to understand that everything is coming out. Now that means either you are going to get ripped online and in the world because you're not acting with integrity, or if you're smart, you recognize that integrity has to be at the core of what you do and driven into the culture of your company so that there's no bad thing to release. So it's instant. The world is instant. It's fast. We are not operating in separate lanes anymore. We're all not, in the old world, we were all in separate lanes trying to make money in business. Now we are running very closely together in tightly packed lanes. Everybody's watching everybody else. Everybody's actions impact something else around them, maybe across the entire world. That changes your obligations, I think, to operate with integrity. And it means that if you don't, the spotlight's on you and you're going to get called out.
Okay, Rob, we're going to get a little personal. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Okay. So you started your career as a federal prosecutor. You even prosecuted the likes of CIA spies.
Right.
How did this experience help shape your philosophy about intentional integrity?
Well, being a federal prosecutor, I think was a hard job in the sense that I didn't feel like I was contributing in a positive way to society. And I know that sounds a little weird, but so let me explain. I was presiding over sort of the end of someone's productive life. When I prosecuted somebody in the federal system, they were going to jail for 20 years, no parole or longer. And it was sad, to be honest. I saw a lot of young kids go to jail who, I think in a lot of ways didn't have fair breaks in life. I prosecuted like Aldrich Ames and some other, CIA, FBI, NSA employees for espionage. But it was sad and negative. And I always thought, I want to do something positive in the world. I want to work for a company where I can start having a positive impact and help people build productive lives. And that's what drove me out of being a federal prosecutor. And I just got lucky. I worked, my jurisdiction where I was a federal prosecutor was Northern Virginia. And while I was a prosecutor, I started getting all these inquiries about a little company called America Online. Some of you on this call may know America Online. Well, back then, nobody had heard of them. I had to go start looking into them just because they were in my jurisdiction, and prosecutors from all over the country were reaching out to me to get records from them. So that's when I went online and for the first time. And I was like, whoa, this is incredible. You know, this internet thing looks like it could actually have some legs. And that's where I found eBay as just a tiny little company. So I think, you know, as a prosecutor, the work is sad work. And I think it really drove me toward trying to be a part of something a lot bigger and more productive. But I wasn't gonna be part of something productive and positive for the world and abandon any sense of doing the right thing and integrity. So I think from a career perspective, I think it kind of evolved into, I want to be part of building something, but I want to be part of building something I'm proud of, something that has integrity. And so my role, I think, you know, part of my role at eBay and at Chegg and at Airbnb was really about building integrity into the culture of the company so that when we are operating in the world, we're doing it in a way that we're all proud of and feel good about. And look, we made mistakes. You know, we could sit on this call for another hour and talk about issues that each of those companies has had. But I think they've had fewer issues than companies that I think that didn't put integrity as a core value and intentionally work at it. And so overall, I think it's the prosecution thing had a big impact on me, but maybe not in the way you'd think.
Well, to end off, can you give us a little background or information about what a person would get out of reading the new book? But even more importantly, I want to know why you wrote it. Why was it so important to get this message out?
Yeah, you know what? We built a program at Airbnb, an integrity program. Kind of different, you know. It's not the integrity poster. It's not the third-party sexual harassment video or the compliance poster or, you know, the canned code of ethics. It was different, and it was a lot more human and authentic. And my initial reaction was I was worried that employees would be like, "Oh, this is some old lawyer. You know, what kind of moral stuff is he pulling?" I got a stunning reaction. Employees loved it. Employees were very engaged with it. They wanted to be part of it. We had deep engagement with our integrity program at the company and widespread across all the different business units all around the world. I was surprised at how it was embraced, even by the younger generation. And I was surprised that it was embraced globally, regardless, you know, the culture of the place, the country that I thought. And the reason I wrote the book was, you know, my wife used to be in the publishing industry a long time ago. And, you know, like, to hammer, everything looks like a nail. To her, everything looks like a book. So she said, look, you got to tell people about this. You know, most companies aren't doing the sort of, you know, interesting things Airbnb is doing in this regard. You ought to share it. I'm like, I'm a lawyer. You know, I'm a general counsel. You know, I'm not an author. I'm not going to write a book. And she said, you really need to do it. You have an obligation to share this. I'm like, no. And she said, I'm going to get you a major publisher and I'm going to get you a writer. And I said, all right, you get me a major publishing deal and you get me a writer and I'll do the book. And that was my mistake, because if anybody knows my wife, you know, a month later, my wife had, you know, offers from multiple publishers, and Macmillan was enthusiastic and signed on for the book. And I had a writer and we did the book. And look, by the time the book came out, I was like, wow, you know what? Maybe I had to really embrace this as something to do now, you know, beyond just one company. Maybe this is something that I want to talk about with a lot of companies. So, you know, you read the book, it's not Plato and Socrates. You know, most people they're surprised when they say, you know, Rob, I actually really like this. You know, it's got a lot of stories, it's got humor, very practical. So if you've got a business and you want integrity to be a part of what you do and how you operate every day, the book practically, I think it's an easy read and it will help you do that.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Rob. This has been such a great hour, and I will turn it back over to Doug.
Thank you, Matthew and Josie and Bob. You've given me so much to think about. I think I don't know if I'm going to sleep tonight. I mean, it is there's so much, and you know, we are at this inflection point, I believe, in our culture where, you know, integrity is, well, it goes, you know, from household to household to global warming types of issues.
right.
So it is no longer, you know, something that you keep quiet and wait for the gold watch, like you say. It is super important right now, and it's what we've been begging, you know, for businesses, for politicians. It's you've given me a lot to think about. Your book, Amazon audio
Sure.
book as
And
well.
a Santa Cruz bookshop. You
Santa
know,
Cruz Bookshop. There we
yeah,
go.
I tried to get Ryan to put like a big cutout of me by the register with stacks of books. It didn't work out that way, but they still got books there. You can get it. You can get it at Amazon. You can get it in any bookstore. If folks are really interested in this, I do a post almost every day on integrity in business, sports, and politics on LinkedIn. So just reach out to me on LinkedIn. Tell me, you know, say that you heard the you know, what we did today on Santa Cruz Works, and love to connect with you and continue the conversation.
Great.
Thank you,
Alrighty,
by the
thank
way.
you again.
Doug, thank you. Thank you, Josie. Thank you, Matthew, Adrian. Thank you guys for doing this and giving me the platform. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you. So
And
great.
thank you to all of everybody who's joined us tonight. We'll see you at our next event.
Take care, y'all.